Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining iGaming Business and Limelight Networks for today's webinar. Online casinos can't afford to gamble on online player experiences. I'm Deputy Editor of iGaming Business, Hannah Gallagher-Stewart, and today's webinar is hosted by Solutions Engineer Kerry Burton-Evans and Senior Product Marketing Manager Charles Krause. If you have any questions during the webinar, please do use the question box to submit them, and Kerry and Charles will go through those at the end of the presentation and answer as many as possible. If you would like to revisit the content of this webinar at all, you can do so from tomorrow morning by visiting the resources section of the iGaming Business website. For now, though, over to Kerry and Charles.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I hope this you're going to find this session very educational and informative and so forth. So really quick on the agenda, I'm going to cover the challenges that are typically encountered with various forms of gambling, from table games to sports betting and so forth. We're going to talk about industry solutions. So pretty much I want to keep this as a lot of industry focus in terms of the kind of services that are available to solve a lot of the video challenges that we have. And this will start from various different types of latency solutions, and we'll get into Subsecond, what I call real-time streaming. Some new technology that lets you do interactive online experiences, which really changes the whole way audiences will experience live video shortly. And then always, we always have to talk about cyber attacks when you talk about anything where there's a lot of money involved and so forth. So some of the typical challenges specifically to gaming is there's certainly online live gaming, gambling, sports betting going on now, but typically with today's infrastructure that video is delivered on, the latencies can be pretty long, 30 seconds to a minute or more. It especially manifests when you talk about live sports versus the stream. So anyone that maybe watched World Cup and they had a broadcast on and then they also had a mobile device would typically see maybe 30 seconds to a minute difference in time between when that happened. The big issue is if you're going to do like in-game wagering and betting on events that are going to happen, you can't have audiences with different time views of things going on. And then as always, the diversity of devices that your audience is going to view on, it's vast and it's only getting larger in terms of the different types of screens and devices and the way people watch. So you have a lot of challenges of getting the lowest possible latency, dealing with all the devices, adding interactivity, and then just always, whenever there's a lot of money involved, is cyber attacks. So we're going to talk about a range of solutions for these. So I want to set the table a bit on latency because different use cases have different requirements for latency. So I just want to sort of set the table on sort of where things stand. So today, HLS dash delivery, which is the way that you receive live streams today, is typically going to be in the 30-second or greater to maybe a minute in delay. And we'll talk about why this is and what you can do about it. Sometimes because people see this long delay on mobile devices, they think that the broadcast really is zero latency, but it's not. If you're getting cable delivery or satellite delivery, you're going to find latency is typically around 5 seconds. It could even be as high as 10. So to match that, you don't necessarily need sub-second latency on your streams. For some use cases, we'll talk about a way that you can modify the way HLS and Dash is delivered to sort of match that. But there's a lot of use cases that are coming up, and especially with interactivity, where you really need ultra low latency. And this gets down to the sub-second range. So for example, video chat is one where if you have much more than a second of latency, it's very difficult because you start talking over each other because of the latency gap, or live video chatting or audio chat. When you're trying to do interactivity, you need it to be real. So we're going to cover solutions that cover the spectrum of these various latencies, so you can see what's available to you to cover them. Just one bit of data. Every year, Limelight surveys the worldwide people's habits of watching online video. And one of the questions we posed pertinent to this topic now is what about latency in sports streaming? And so you can see here that the more you lower the latency, the better your chance of increasing your audience size. So just a quick supporting data point for what we're going to be talking about here. So right now, let's get into the technologies. And I said we're talking about a spectrum of these to solve latency problems across different requirements. So let's define latency. So a lot of people have different ways they measure it. So for the purposes of this, we'd like to use a very strict way to define this because we want to incorporate all the different workflow pieces. So we're talking about latency that's what I call glass to glass. So this is from the camera lens at the live event to the viewer seeing it on his screen. So that encompasses every possible piece of the workflow. We don't want to define it leaving out major pieces like encoding and so forth, and to show a latency that's really lower than real, because that's really the real latency, right? Is what's actually happening at the event and what do you see on your screen. So that we use that strict definition. So I'm going to turn this over to Kerrion now, and he's going to talk about various technologies for dealing with this.
Thank you, Charlie. So I'm going to focus initially on talking about low latency video delivery using HTTP chunk streaming formats, specifically HLS and Dash, as over the last few years, these turned out to be the most prolific and successful solutions employed today. HTTP was never really intended as a protocol for video delivery, as its focus is reliability rather than low latency, just making sure the packets actually reach their destination. So as a result, HTTP chunk streaming kind of evolved as sort of a halfway house to provide live video delivery using the protocol. And as a result, today it's possible to achieve reliable latency in the range of between, say, 5 to 30 seconds using chunk streaming, which, depending on the application, may be perfectly acceptable delay. For example, if you're watching a live stream of a rock concert, that doesn't necessarily require instant sub-second latency. Being 30 seconds behind what's happening actually at the event is perfectly acceptable. There is one technology that I'm not going to talk about, but except for briefly now, and that is flash streaming, because there's still a fair amount of it going on in the industry today, and it does succeed in achieving low latency. But it's generally accepted that this is a dying technology due to the reduction in browser support and the security concerns that make it much more arduous for the users to actually consume these streams due to the need to install plugins, etc. So while it's out there, it's kind of recognized that it's going away and that we need something to replace it. So I'm not going to focus on flash streaming. So the slide that we're seeing at the moment, is talking about HLS and Dash distribution, where the encoding and packaging of the live streams is predominantly happening at the source encoder. And as a result, latency is controlled by the video chunk size and also with the reliability of the distribution network, or CDN. So in this workflow, the source encoder is responsible for creating all the necessary bit rates, which, depending on the target audience and devices, may be a single high quality stream if you're just targeting desktop users, or multiple renditions to support adaptive bitrate switching, such as for mobile devices. The source encoder is also responsible for creating the video chunks and supporting manifests for HLS and/or MPEG Dash delivery, which it then pushes to the clients via a delivery network, such as CDN. As we're dealing with live video in this flow, well, throughout this entire presentation, the chunks can't be pre-cached, so latency is controlled by the setting of that chunk size used by the encoder, and also the speed and reliability of the distribution network. If latency and reliability of the delivery network is questionable, then you would typically set a larger chunk size to provide more buffer in the player should the distribution of new chunks get delayed. But that then in turn reduces the latency, or increases the latency rather, for the end user, pushing it up to that sort of 30-second mark. Alternatively, you can go for a smaller chunk size if you have a reliable network. So if I use Limelight Networks as an example, we operate our own private fiber backbone to connect our points of presence. This is a really highly reliable and low latency network, which means we can support global delivery of HLS and Dash with a chunk size of as small as 1 second, because we can accelerate the delivery of manifests and the live chunks across the network to the point of presence for the end user consuming the content across our low latency network. In our experience, using these approaches, you can get latency down to just under 5 seconds glass to glass in real world streaming applications. But there are challenges, which I'll talk about next. Please, Charlie. So Potential issues with the previous workflow, where handling of the bit rates and the streams happened at the source encoder, are predominantly to do with upload bandwidth and also evolution of streaming formats. So if we consider bandwidth first, handling multiple bit rates at origin requires sufficient bandwidth at the origin location to upload those bit rates to the distribution CDN. So for example, if you're a casino providing, let's say, 3 different qualities, 4 megabit, 2 megabit, and 1 megabit streams per table in both HLS and dash formats, this is going to require you to have at least 14 megabits of upload bandwidth per table. The total bandwidth you therefore require becomes quite sizable very quickly as you introduce additional tables, additional formats. So if you put Microsoft Smooth Streaming or HDS in there as well, then you're actually doubling or tripling the number of streams. And then, there's also, potentially primary and backups coming from your source to the cloud network, and that also then doubles the amount of bandwidth needed. This has cost implications, but it also may have resilience issues as well, depending on where your encoders are located, as it might be hard to source reliable low latency bandwidth at scale. The other issue is one of evolving formats and device proliferation. So as new devices, sort of become available that can streaming video, the video formats they consume also change. If you handle the packaging and chunking of the streams at your source, then you have to keep pace with these evolutions of devices and set up your encoder to output the relevant formats. And this sort of detracts from the core business of generating the content of the live streams. So this is where the workflow we're showing here in this diagram can have benefits by deferring the transcode and transmuxing to the cloud. So with transmuxing in the cloud, the bit rate is still handled by the source encoder, but only 1 stream per bit rate is pushed to the cloud provider, which then performs the task of chunking and wrapping into the required delivery protocols such as HLS, dash, smooth streaming, etc. The cloud provider may also provide the option to push primary and backup streams to provide resilience if need be. With a transrate and transmux sort of solution in the cloud, the source encoder only provides a single high quality bitrate stream, and then the cloud creates multiple lower bit rates on the fly, as well as the chunking for the different delivery protocols. As before, the latency of delivery to the client is controlled by the chunk size, reliability, and speed of the network, but also any latency introduced by the cloud transformation, transrating obviously adding more latency than a simple transmux. In our experience, using this sort of approach, you can get latency down to just around 6 seconds glass to glass, utilizing a transmux in the cloud workflow. Next slide, please, Charlie. So while not strictly talk about live streaming, just one thing I want to touch on before I get to sort of an example use case is that of taking a live stream and using it to generate VOD assets. So, there are many scenarios where you might want to take your live event and actually archive it so that you can play it back at a later time, such as providing on-demand highlights of an event, or taking a premium paid live event and make it available then via a VOD subscription service so you can actually monetize the event again. The idea here is the live stream is being delivered, the event is archived into some form of cloud-based storage for selected bit rates, with the recording configured based on some form of schedule to capture either sections of an event or potentially even 24/7 archiving. The challenge of reducing latency is not as prevalent here as we're dealing with VOD assets, but doing this in the cloud does reduce VOD playback latency because the chunks can then be cached at the edge of the distribution network as they've been pre-generated. In Limelight specific implementation of live to VOD, for example, the event is stored as a single MP4 per bitrate rather than the individual chunks. The benefits this provides are it reduces the storage requirements and therefore the cost by not actually having it stored in the different formats in the storage platform. But then it also allows transmuxing on the fly, depending on the target audience. The devices for VOD content don't need to be the same as for the live event. You could basically offer a desktop-only live event, but then VOD offer it to mobile for HLS and dash streaming, for example. Next slide, please, Charlie. So I thought it'd be useful to look at actually a real-world application of some of these live streaming techniques and talk about one of the customers I work with, which is Authentic Gaming. Authentic Gaming supplies gaming operators with live table games that are streamed in real time from land-based casinos opening the gaming tables to the whole world and providing a unique experience to online players. Basically, it allows people sitting at home on their mobile devices or on their desktops to basically get the experience of some of the most prestigious and luxurious casinos in the world by allowing you to be part of the action there. The challenge that authentic gaming had and came to us with was low latency streaming to mobile devices. And the challenge was twofold. One was getting the live stream latency low enough to provide acceptable experience, but the other was to get consistent latency so that they could synchronize what was happening in the gaming application with that of the video stream. They tested with other providers and managed to get latency down in the 8 to 10 seconds range, but they couldn't provide any sort of consistent latency, which does pose them synchronization problems. So they ended up implementing a Limelight Transmux solution with a 1 second chunk size, which enables them to achieve 5 seconds glass-to-glass latency and provides the consistency you need for a playable game experience without having the overextended or overly small betting window because of high latency. The less waiting the player has between interactions with the game, the more enjoyable it is for the player, and also, the more revenue the casino can generate by actually having more windows for betting. Next slide, please, Charlie. Actually, over to you, Charlie, to talk a little bit about Subsecond streaming.
All right, so now we're gonna delve into some new technology that's coming out for sub-second latency. So in the use cases where this is required, where there's a lot of interactivity or betting in live events or active video chatting between users and the providers of the content, where you really do have to get this down to sub-second. There's ways of doing it, but I just want to go over some of the pretty daunting challenges that come up doing this. So given all the discussion we had about the 30-second plus latencies of HTTP streaming, so but the world is covered with infrastructure right now that can deliver HTTP at a massive scale. We had the World Cup this year, and you probably saw some of that data of really millions and millions of streams simultaneously being delivered globally from World Cup over that infrastructure. So the HTTP HLS- infrastructure is extremely robust. It's covered around the world and so forth. But there's just a lot of use cases where that's just too much latency. So you have that to solve that problem. And at the same time, we don't want to go back to plugins like you're required with Flash. So we wanted to find some technologies that don't require plugins, that are supported on devices that are already out there, and we'll be able to let anybody view sub-second latency. And at the same time, because the current infrastructure is global, any solution you have for sub-second also has to have a global footprint. So, three pretty daunting challenges out there, more than one way to solve them, and we'll talk about some of these different methods. So Limelight real-time streaming is what we're calling our solution. So this is WebRTC based. So WebRTC is an industry standard. It was developed by Google back in 2012, and it was originally developed as a peer-to-peer solution. So a group of people could talk browser to browser in a peer group at sub-second latency. And this works really well. If you use Gmail, for example, there's a tool called Hangout where you can audio or video chat with people. And if you use that tool, you've experienced that you can have a video chat, and you know that the latency is pretty much real time sub-second, because you're not talking over each other. You can, you have that very strong feeling that this is, very, very quick chatting between it. A lot of webinar tools use WebRTC based. If you Google WebRTC solutions, you'll find that there's literally hundreds of products out there, many in the the voice chat, audio chat, video chat kind of world out there. So what we like about that technology, it definitely delivers sub-second latency. It lends itself for global scale. So even though it was designed for peer-to-peer capability, we're going to talk about a solution that uses it in a little different manner. It's using WebRTC video format, but instead of using it peer-to-peer, we're going to use this for global sub-second video distribution, using it in a one-to-many configuration, and we'll get into that. And the other nice thing is it lends itself to incorporating interactivity. So unlike like some of the chunk solutions, you have the capability with real-time streaming to have an interactive channel where you can share data with each other. So I'm going to turn this back over to Carrie now to go into the details of real-time streaming.
So as Charlie just mentioned, real-time streaming is based on Web Real-Time Communication Protocol, or WebRTC, which was developed for voice and video chat communication applications where minimal latency is required. So it's ideally suited for live streaming where the goal is sub-second latency, such as for applications where users can perform some interaction based on what's happening in the live stream now. WebRTC has some differences from HTTP-based streaming that enables this lower latency, which is how the challenges that Charlie spoke about are addressed. The first is that the primary communication protocol for WebRTC is UDP as opposed to TCP-based for chunk streaming. UDP is a less latent protocol as it follows a fire and forget model for packets, as opposed to TCP, which requires confirmations that packets have been received by the client. This results in a lot less round trips, and as you take out trips in terms of packets back and forth, this reduces latency. Additionally, with WebRTC, there is no video buffer on the client, again, because we're talking about real time, what's happening now. So with HTTP streaming, players traditionally buffer a minimum of 3 video chunks before starting playback, which is why currently 4 to 5 seconds latency is the best that can be achieved, because glass to glass, because you've got 3 1-second chunks plus the overhead on either end, resulting in 4 to 5 second latency with HLS and dash streaming. With WebRTC, the stream is played as soon as packets start to be received. Again, this further reduces latency. Limelight real-time streaming addresses the challenges of plugins by virtue of native browser support. So if you basically paste a URL into a browser, then the video will start to play as long as you've got a reasonably modern browser. Should the client not be capable of accepting UDP traffic, such as due to firewall rules, then Limelight RTS will attempt WebRTC over TCP as a failover. And there are also additional failover methods for older browsers that don't play well with WebRTC, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then finally, global scale is addressed by deploying this technology across Limelight's content delivery network. This enables regional ingest locations for both primary and backup streams, which are pushed over RTMP. And the fact that we have regional locations minimizes the latencies of getting the streams onto the CDN. We then leverage our private fiber backbone to distribute the streams globally across our network, and then at the edge convert to WebRTC for low latency playout to the audience. Now, Charlie mentioned WebRTC being initially designed for peer-to-peer. Limelight's implementation doesn't actually use any peer-to-peer at all. The communication is straight from the edge to the client, and then we provide the scale based on sort of the amount of capacity we have for WebRTC at our edges. This affords us much more control and quality of service than a peer-to-peer solution where we have absolutely no control over individual end users' bandwidth and upload bandwidth, and therefore the experience for users that they are then serving. When you put all this together, you have a platform that can deliver sub-second latency live video at scale anywhere in the world. Next, I'll talk a little bit about some of the features of the solution. Could you, next slide, please, Charlie?
Yep.
Okay, so there is more to live streaming than just providing low latency. So with Limelight real-time streaming, we built in some additional features that our experience shows our live video customers require in order to provide their service. First among those is device support and customer reach. So while WebRTC is supported across all major modern browsers, not all users have a modern device or browser or on a network that accepts UDP. So to cater for this, we provide a myriad of fallback streaming options. These include trying to communicate with WebRTC over TCP if UDP connections fail. And then we've also got options to fall back to RTMP streaming or low latency HLS should the device we're trying to talk to not accept WebRTC to ensure that the video plays to the end user regardless of the device they're on. Given that WebRTC does not utilize player buffers and that UDP is a fire and forget sort of communication protocol or network protocol, we've introduced support via an SDK for adaptive bitrate streaming using WebRTC. So when end viewer players detect less than optimal network conditions, there's an option to switch to lower bitrate streams to ensure continuous playback. This avoids dropped frames and artifacts in the video streams, and means that Limelight's real-time streaming can be effective for a vast range of connectivity situations, from users on 100 megabit per second broadband connections to low bandwidth mobile connections such as 2.5 and 3G in some of the emerging markets. Regarding integrated analytics, we provide these via both a web-based portal and also an API in order for customers to basically integrate them with their own dashboards. We provide information to monitor stats about live streaming, including number of viewers, viewer duration, geographic distribution, etc. Basically, trying to provide sort of business intelligence data so that our customers can be more effective in planning and delivering their future events, and also marketing and targeting their end customers. And then finally, Limelight understands that our customers' content is potentially their most valuable asset and what differentiates them in this marketplace. So there are a number of security features that we have built into the platform to protect unauthorized access to streams. These include restricting playback based on geo and IP information on the client, URL tokenization and stream authentication to ensure that we only allow users that are permitted to access your live streams. And then also, so as table stakes, we use TLS encryption throughout on the streams themselves. Next slide, please, sorry. So Charlie talked earlier on about interactivity, and this is quite an exciting aspect of Limelight real-time streaming. So when we were developing the platform, we talked to a lot of our customers about their live streaming wants and needs, and most of them expressed some interest in a mechanism to support interaction with what is happening in the live stream now, and the users. So we developed something called shared data objects. These follow a publisher-subscriber model, and it acts a bit like a remote real-time bucket, if you want. So as soon as you make any changes to this bucket, anyone who's subscribing to it will automatically get notified. This enables real-time data communication and lets customers bidirectionally send a data object alongside their video. An example of applications include real-time messaging and chat, data collection for things like IoT devices, real-time polling and surveying of your users, quiz and trivia games, and much, much more. Combined with sub-1 second latency features, shared data objects help set Limelight real-time streaming apart from the other streaming options in the marketplace. And it's a very exciting technology that enables an immersive and interactive application based around live video. Next slide, please, Charlie. So software development kits. WebRTC, as I mentioned many times already, is a protocol natively supported by a lot of modern browsers. But for customers that are using their own players rather than just the inbuilt native players in the browser, we've made available a HTML SDK to assist those customers in integrating WebRTC into their applications. This SDK provides all the features you need to use WebRTC on your own player and your own application, such as establishing a local stream connection, subscribing to a stream, and switching bit rates. Additionally, when it comes to mobile, sort of some customers require a native application rather than just a web app. And so we've got a mobile SDK should you need to develop for Apple App Store or Android Play. And this enables you to leverage the benefits of Limelight real-time streaming while building more customized and tailored experiences. Use of the SDKs are not mandatory, and you can build web applications for both desktop and mobile utilizing the native browser. But sort of we're providing flexibility by offering you SDKs. And personally, I'm very excited to see what our customers and the general community come up with using them in terms of like real-time interactive experiences. Over you to talk a little bit about security, Charlie.
All right, so we talked about security so far in terms of basically access control level, but in the realm of casino operations and sports betting and so forth, you have to take a broader view of this, not just access control, but other expected security services. So we're going to expand this discussion. So of all the cyber crime targets out there, you can't ignore the fact that in the gambling industry, it's just it's the perfect storm, as we say, of huge sums of money and personal data, lots of sensitive financial and personal data on millions of players and so forth. I looked up some data on this. The cash transactions per minute, it rivals some of the world's largest banks. And that's probably not too surprising. And of course, multiple points of entry. You've got, if you're having websites that are open, you have mobile apps, You have entertainment venues, lots of ATMs around in brick and mortar casinos, point of sale, you have stores, et cetera. So it's just actually a perfect storm for cybercrime. So so certainly a lot of security challenges facing the industry in general. So when you say criminals, they only need to get lucky once getting in. If you're a casino, you have to be lucky all the time, 24/7. So there's no doubt the frequency of attacks is going up, the sophistication's going up. Wi-Fi networks are all over. They're susceptible. You have to worry about the integrity of games. In IoT devices, on and on and on. So Carrie-Ann's just going to do a review of more comprehensive security features that you should consider in addition to just the sort of access control aspects we talked about so far.
Okay, so when it comes to sort of security, we talked a little bit before about access control to streams. So that's more about protecting content. Here, we're focusing on actually sort of protecting your service availability and your infrastructure from malicious actors and hackers out there that want to steal data, money, extort, sort of money out of our customer base based on denying their service, etc. So when it comes to this sort of security, I don't believe that you can ever have enough. So we promote a defense in depth strategy, which is what this model is trying to show. And it all starts with actually the CDN. So hackers have access to massive botnets that can launch huge scale attacks. So we saw last year attacks in excess of 1 terabit per second using infected IoT devices, sort of the Google Mirai botnet, for example. So putting a CDN in front of your service helps turn the attackers' advantage back on themselves, because you basically distribute accessibility to your service over a larger footprint. There's no single point of attack, because a CDN have point of presence across the globe and provide a wide footprint to distribute those attacks against. And then, sort of certain amounts of content, such as static content, can just be soaked up by the CDN at the edge and never seen by your origin. As we peel the onion and we get down to DDoS detection and mitigation, so the hackers and bad actors focus here is about denying your service, so that basically legitimate users can't get access to it, and therefore they then extort money from you in order to stop the attack and enable your service to be available. Now, in the past, if we go back 10, 20 years, the solution for DDoS attacks was on-premise equipment. But the scale and volume of attacks, sort of have gotten so great. I've already mentioned an example of a 1 terabit per second attack, that when you use on-premise equipment, your protection is only as good as your pipe to the internet from your origin infrastructure. So typically, so we see customers who, sort of have connectivity in terms of the tens of megabits, maybe if they're lucky, the tens of gigabits, but it's very easy to overwhelm that pipe with bad traffic, and therefore legitimate traffic can't get through to the scrubbing and mitigation devices. So, so it's generally accepted that moving your DDoS mitigation out into the cloud is the more effective way of doing this. Again, spreading over a large surface area with large amounts of bandwidth and connectivity, and then funneling the traffic through cloud-based scrubbing centers when you're under attack, and then allowing the clean scrub traffic through to your origin to serve legitimate users. This does introduce challenges in terms of, sort of who controls the detection, and tells you when you need to you're under attack and need to switch to mitigation. Limelight's model is, so we provide an always-on monitoring solution where we proactively engage our customers when we see bad traffic, and then allow a fast switch to mitigation. Other providers will provide always-on mitigation that provides you with security, but it comes at the cost of performance, because you're always funneling your traffic through scrubbing centers. And then finally, we get to web application firewall, which for me personally is probably the scariest of the different attack vectors, because with a DDoS attack, while it can be frustrating and it costs you credibility and users, at least you know about it. If you're a DDoS attacked and you weren't aware that you're being DDoS attacked, then it wasn't a very effective DDoS attack. Whereas the goal of web application firewall-based attacks is to basically to slip under the radar and go unnoticed. And in the industry at the moment, the average time for you to detect a WAF attack, if you haven't got sufficient countermeasures in place to detect it, is between 6 to 9 months. So that's 6 to 9 months to actually identify and notice that somebody has actually compromised your security. And And the goal with a WAF attack is basically to steal personal information and to compromise, sort of applications. The sort of information they might be looking for is ideally things like credit cards, because you can then spend money. But any personal information that can be obtained about your customer base can be useful in a orchestrated and well-planned cyber attack. So if they can steal email addresses and the names of the services that your customers subscribe to, it's very easy to then launch a phishing attack and send convincing emails as if they're coming from you, the customers, to try and then steal credentials and passwords, etc. So again, you want to look at actually putting an effective web application firewall in front of your origin. Here, you don't have to worry about bandwidth because we're talking about low volume of traffic under the radar. You just want to make sure that it's intelligent and can actually differentiate between bots and legitimate users. And it mentions here, there's an open web application security project that documents top 10 sort of exploits you need to be defending against. Limelight can provide automated bot intelligence management and API protection as well. So there's a vast layer of protection options here. But coming back to what I said at the start, when it comes to security, you can never have enough. Just basically defense in depth is what you should be looking for. Back to you, Charlie.
Okay, thank you. So we're getting to the end here, and we're going to dive into the Q&A session. Hopefully questions are coming in. But just a quick word from your sponsor at the end in terms of Limelight and what we do. So as mentioned, we're a global CDN, our own private backbone. We only use the internet for the first and last mile delivery because we can't, with thousands of peering agreements. But we focus on these 4 areas as today's topic: live video, also on demand, OTT services used a lot. Another big area is software file downloads. So these are your updates to your operating systems and mobile devices and so forth that go on. Web content, delivering all the different types of objects to websites, video and text and so forth for customers. And more recently, IoT and edge compute, which is a whole other topic. But because CDNs just have this global coverage, they lend themselves to edge computing. Strengths and expertise for live events. So any big sport event, World Cup, Olympics, if you're in the US, NFL football, we have delivered the largest live event streams that go on. Online gaming is growing rapidly. So these areas are all highlight areas for us in the live streaming realms. And every CDN will have a picture that looks a lot like this. Major pops in all the places you might expect to see them, with connections under the oceans and around, covering the continents and so forth. And capacity is always growing every couple of months. We're always adding more capacity just because traffic's growing. Cisco puts out these wonderful state of the internet a couple of times a year, and they talk about traffic growth. And by 2020, probably 80% of the internet is going to be carrying video traffic of some sort. So we're never done scaling the network to cover that. So just in summary, it's proven by World Cup and other major sports events recently. The better experience you can provide your users, the more of them, the bigger the audience gets. The lower the latency, the bigger the audience gets. I think the interactivity thing, we're very excited about this because it's going to really change the experience for users for live events because they can interact with them. And it certainly for various betting and online gambling operations, vastly increases users' access to that and grow that audience. And it goes without saying, of course, the global reach in any devices. We've harped on that a lot. These decks will be available afterwards along with the recording. I put a URL in. A lot of the data that we were citing through this entire thing was on this gambling player research data that we found from OpenBet. So that link will take you to a really good report on industry data that's relatively new. All right, so Q&A. So for more information, while we do Q&A, I just put this up. So there's our website. There's an email for getting more information. There's a number. And I'm going to look in now and see what we can find for any questions. Okay, so starting to see questions come in. So let me address the first one here. It has to do with scaling. So what the question comes down to is if you really wanted to do a massive event today of the scale of World Cup, is sub-second latency any of the solutions out there at that scale yet to do something that massive? So the numbers that we're seeing is really in the millions of simultaneous streams. So I'll be perfectly honest. For us, our real-time streaming was announced at IBC back in September, and the service is now active and turned on, and our first customers are starting to use it. And we have POPs that we've put in all the different regions of the world that have the WebRTC infrastructure in them. But it's not at the scale that you could do millions of streams yet. So what we're doing is we have pretty robust scaling already for the use cases we're starting to see. And what we're going to do is we're going to watch what the requests are. So as people want to use this, our first question is always, what are your requirements? How many users do you have to reach? Where are they? What's the bit rate? How many streams, etc. And for the most part, from what we're seeing now, we have plenty of infrastructure to do that, but we're watching carefully to see how we need to scale. And as the requirements increase in size, as mentioned, it's just a matter of scaling the infrastructure on the edge. And these are all virtual machines that we just add in. So we can rapidly scale up, and we will as the requirements come in. But right, so far so good. Go ahead, Karen. Why don't you take a question or two that you see?
Thank you, Charlie. So I see a question just come in, asking what the best way of uploading video to reduce latency is. Unfortunately, I haven't got like a definitive answer. Like everything in technology, there are pros and cons, and we touched on it a little bit in terms of the presentation, where you can achieve much lower latency. Sort of dealing with the packaging and the dealing with everything, including packaging and chunking, etc., actually at the source encoder. But then that puts requirements in terms of bandwidth and so your connectivity to sort of your distribution network versus sort of removing some of those bandwidth constraints and deferring to the cloud, but then adding additional sort of latency. I mean, one of the ways obviously is how are you compressing sort of your video. So if you're looking to sort of different codecs, BP9, H.265 versus H.264, you can look to actually get high quality, so 1080p, 4K video, but much lower bit rates, and that will obviously help reduce the latency in terms of the ingest. But the downside of that then is actually device support for those sort of codecs. So it's really, there is no one answer. It's understanding your users and what tools are available to you. Can they understand these higher compression sort of codecs or not? How much latency are they willing to take? Where am I going to place my encoders so that I've got good connectivity and reliable connectivity sort of to my distribution networks? And then basically, based on that information, making a decision. One thing that I did see, sort of to name sort of another company, but I saw a presentation by Netflix recently where they talked about actually, sort of more advanced encoding techniques for things like H.264. So, sort of you can actually squeeze sort of the same quality out of much, sort of higher compression by optimizing based on the type of content and the type of information you're actually streaming. So if you hunt around in Google, I'm sure you can find some of those notes, and that's useful. So sorry, I'm not sure that I completely answered the question because there's not one answer in terms of how to reduce latency for uploading. There are many facets, and you just basically have to choose for your user base and your service, what are the best options.
Sure.
Over to you, Charlie.
Yeah, so I can add just more of an enhancement to that answer. So in terms of newer technology, there's another protocol that's gathering a lot of interest that High Vision is actually called SRT, and this is on the contribution side, not on the user delivery side. So keeping the theme a little latency, T is starting to get a lot of interest as far as the protocol from video from a live event into the CDNs. So it's similar to WebRTC in that the way. So if you go to the High Vision website, you can see a lot of information on SRT, and that's something we're looking at as well. Also, when we respond to, if we don't get through all the questions, we're going to respond afterwards. Well, we'll do a follow-up to everyone that registered of just some specific products that we are aware of that people use to upload video, things that do like cell bonding, cell phone bonding and things like that, all kinds of ways of doing that. I see a good question I like here. Do you support the WebRTC data channel? So yeah, we hinted out there when we talked about interactivity, and the WebRTC spec does cover something called a data channel, but this is very specific. This data channel applies to using WebRTC in a peer-to-peer mode. So either in having a cluster of browsers that want to talk to each other, the data channel is they're at a bandwidth control plane, and that's how the various browsers communicate with each other to say, hey, I want to look at, I want to get in this chat, do you have some bits? And it's sort of how they connect with each other and share. It's not meant as another channel, in other words, that you could send video over. It's really a data plane. And another example of how that data channel is used, there are other competing solutions to our WebRTC solution that are peer-to-peer. So instead of having a one-to-many distribution like we've been describing, they're relying on peer-to-peer. So if you have a lot of people out there that want to watch this, if they're watching the same stream, they want to be able to share the video segments with each other. So the idea is to avoid having to send a lot of video from one single source out broadly around the world. The idea is to scale by having peer-to-peer and sharing with ISPs. And the data channel in that case is being used for that kind of coordination. But some of the problems you run into there is it's critically dependent on the right critical mass of people or viewers watching the same video streams in a same global area, a certain regional area with the same ISP, so that they can actually share. So when in a peer-to-peer arrangement, they have to talk to a central stream server to say, I want to watch this football match. Can you connect me to any other people that are near me that are also watching that match so we can share video content? And if you don't have enough critical mass, what they're relying on happens to be a CDN that they're using to distribute out so that you have a lot of points of distribution so that the peer-to-peer clusters regionally can have another source of video content. But the fact that you can't guarantee quality of service, you can't guarantee anything because it's all dependent on how many viewers by chance happen to be watching the same streams. Another issue that's not discussed is who's going to pay for that. If you have a lot of that video data that's being used in and out of various user devices, are the users going to have their data plan hit? Are the ISPs going to pay for that? Somebody has to pay for it. So I'm aware of about 4 different solutions that are WebRTC peer-to-peer like this that are going to partner with a CDN to do that. We're just curious to see in reality what happens in terms of critical mass of viewers to do it. But so we do not support that because that's orthogonal to the way we do it. Our data channel is different. It's really, as we said, it's object sharing. So what it really is a WebSocket connection between the content owner site and all the audience out there. So if let's say it's a betting environment, anything they change in terms of the betting screen, like offering a bet or people saying, I want to make a bet on something or take another card, anything that's changed is reflected on the other end at about the same latency, actually a little quicker latency than the video arrives. So it's not strict synchronization, but it's all sub-second. So if you change any of the data that's in the main screen, all the audience that's logged in and watching your video, in under a second, will see those same changes reflected. So it's that shared object. If you think of Google Docs, if 2 people or multiple people can be editing the same spreadsheet and they can see each other in there, but anybody makes a change, it's reflected by everybody else. So that's how the data sharing works in real-time streaming. And we don't need that DRTC data channel because we don't have that peer-to-peer issue. See if we have any other questions here.
So I see a question asking about if we use our own TurnStand servers. So yes, we do have our own stand servers, that are using for sort of traversing NATs and identifying and sort of who is sitting behind the sort of shared IP, and that's a big part of our solution. We don't actually use Turn though. We use as our fallback actually to HLS and RTMP. So if there's issues, utilizing Stun to communicate with the end client, then our fallback is to HLS, and we don't actually use Turn. But we do have our own Stun servers in our network.
Yeah, I do see. Generally, upload bandwidth is a lot lower than download. Absolutely. CDNs are massive egress machines, right? A little bit of source data in, and then massively distributed out. So it's quite a high ratio of traffic only in that one direction, which plays nicely to the interactivity. That means that you have that other side of the highway, that's not well used. So it's easy for then users to be able to have interactivity back to the content owner, because the other direction is hardly any traffic in general. So it makes the interactivity, sort of very easy to handle for CDNs, then concentrate that back. See another one, carry on, that you want to handle?
Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat to see if there's any more questions.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking too.
So I see a question here asking about asking if we could talk about content protection in the light of current cyber threat environment. I think there's also two parts to this question. So if I'm understanding it correctly, because content protection is more, I would consider it more about access to the live streams. The thing that I said about earlier is what differentiates our customers, and sort of as a general rule, the malicious actors that basically want to extract data and apply denial of service attacks aren't looking to actually get access to the content. The content thereafter is actually user information and credentials. So content protection for me is more about actually making sure that the users have the right to access it. They're not hackers in the traditional sense. They're not cyber threats, but they're just basically everybody trying to get hold of stuff for free. Potentially maybe bots trying to scrape feeds so that your live feed can then be used on another site. And that's where things like our URL tokenization comes in. So this basically ensures that the end application that's accessing a feed actually is valid through the use of something like a shared secret to generate a cookie or a parameter token in a URL. And then there are additional features that we add to that, such as validity duration. So when you generate a URL, it could be valid for only 5 seconds or 10 seconds, so that people can't copy and paste URLs if they aren't valid users. Similarly, we can restrict content access based on IP address or IP range. So when you generate a URL for an end user to watch a video stream, he can't give it to his friend on chat to access because the IP address won't match.
Okay, so I actually don't see any other questions, and we're nearing the top of the hour, so we're going to terminate now. So first, I want to thank everyone for their attention. I hope this was informative for you, and we look forward to having you on a future webinar. And just to repeat what we said at the beginning, everyone that registered or attended will get a follow-up with a link to the recorded version of this if you want to share that with any of your colleagues that didn't have the opportunity to attend live. And with that, we'll sign off and have a good rest of your day.